In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So, we're past the halfway point, right? Where the series is coming to an end. We're on chapter 7 today of the book of Esther. And we talked a lot about the crazy up and downs in this story. And a lot going on. And a lot of... it's hard to break it verse by verse, because this is, like we said, it's very different than the rest of the books in the Bible. This is a story. So we can take the stories and see how we can relate to them. So before we get into chapter 7, from the people who were here last week, what was the last thing we saw in chapter 6? And this will kind of refresh those who haven't been here, just to kind of give them an idea of what's been going on. So just before we get into that, the coolest thing about Esther is that God is there, but He's invisible. And sometimes we feel that way in our life. We don't see God actually doing anything, but we know that He's moving pieces around us, and He's active behind us, around us. He's the director in this. Like, we don't see the director when we watch a movie, but He's there, and you could see His presence, and you could see Him being very active. So the last thing in chapter 6, does anybody remember?
The last thing,
what happened in chapter 6?
Well, Haman wanted to hang Mordecai.
Okay.
Because Mordecai obviously didn't want to bow down to him. And the king had asked Haman, what should he give someone that has, I guess, saved his life, basically.
Yeah. So, exactly. So the irony of all ironies. Last chapter, we saw, it was kind of like a meanwhile scene, where it's like, we're going in one direction, all of a sudden, the chapter 6 starts with the king can't go to sleep. And why couldn't he go to sleep? Because there was something on his mind. What was on his mind? The fact that he felt guilty because he didn't do anything for Mordecai. And Mordecai saved his life. How could the king not reward such a feat? Such a person who saved his life. So that kind of what was on his mind. Now, at that time, Haman comes in. And Haman is his second to the king, right? He's the evil vice president. And he tells him, why was Haman going to talk to the king? Does anybody remember? What was his plan? To murder Mordecai. So he's going to tell the king, hey, you got to take care of Mordecai. And I have something built for him. He's ready to go. And the king is sitting there and he sees Haman and he's like, hey, what would you do to somebody to honor him? And who did Haman think he was talking about? Himself. Now, we talked a little bit about how we see God working and God using things that even like building this huge gallows to hang somebody sounds like a really bad thing. But God still uses the bad in our life and turns it. And we'll see here as well how our life, the best example I've heard is that when we're living in God, when we're living with God, it's kind of like putting the address in a GPS. So I use Waze. Some people use Google Maps. Some people use Apple Maps. Whatever. Any type of navigation system. And you put an address in there. And you start going. And it tells you, make a right. And you go left. What happens? Does it just shut off?
No.
it reroutes you. And it gets, to me, I feel like sometimes it gets more annoyed. Like, it's like, I said make a right. And then you make that left. And then what happens? You continue going, and then something happens. You might stop, and you might listen to it with the redirection, and you might be going in the same way, and all of a sudden, traffic hits. What do? Traffic hits. Some navigation systems will tell you, you know what? There's a different way. Get off here. A better way. That's how I feel God is with us. And we'll see in this chapter how God is also using things that aren't the best, but for His will. And I want us to always think about that, to see how, as we're moving through this story, to think about things in our life, things that we might have messed up in. Hardships, tribulations, issues, bad decisions. We all have plenty of them. But how God uses that, but for His glory. And that's the key. And the funniest thing about the book, the key verse that I take out of this book is not even from this book. And Regina last week mentioned it again. It's Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to His purpose. So that's all of us. So as long as we're continuing in His path, the director changes things around. Okay? So last thing was the king. Haman went to tell the king, hey, get rid of Mordecai. The king, before he even said that, the king said, how would you reward somebody who is such a good person? And Haman, his ego, his pride kicked in, and he said, he must be talking about me. I'm second to the king. Like, who else is he going to reward? I'm the one who gets invited to all these parties with him. I'm the only one who's going to reward. So he's like, you know what you should do? You should give him a robe. You should not only robe him, you should robe his horse. Gold plated, please. And do this and do that and have a parade for him and really just go all out. He deserves it. And the king's like, you know what? That's a great idea. So now go do it for Mordecai. It's one of the funniest passages. Anybody who hasn't read it, I would suggest just to read. The book of Esther is very short, but for before next week, to read up to the end of chapter 7, so we're all on the same page. But it's a really cool twist to the story. Now, so he goes and he robes him and move on from there. Now, chapter 7 starts. Let's if somebody can read 1 through 4.
So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request up to half the kingdom? It shall be done. And Queen Esther answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss.
Okay. What's the scene now? Where are we in the story? What's going on? So basically, the queen, Esther, remember, she's a Jew. And just to catch everybody up who hasn't been here, the story started with the king. This king owned so much land. I think from Ethiopia to India, right? Almost half the world at the time. And he was in complete control. And he liked to party, and he threw big feasts and banquets and stuff like that. And he was surrounded by a bad group of people, his advisors. At the same time, there was a man named Mordecai, a godly man, that lived right outside the king's gates. And he stood outside the king's gate all the time. This man was a righteous man, and one day, the king, after the king got rid of his old queen, he found another queen. It turned out to be Mordecai's relative. And that's Queen Esther. That's who this book is about. So this great godly queen is now up there. Like, she went from nothing to, to the top. Because of her looks. She was a beautiful queen, and that's why, and God used that, and he took her and he put her in that spot. But God, like the king picked her because of her looks, God picked her because of who she was inside, because how she worshipped Him. Now, fast forward, the king picks Haman as his second in charge, this vice president. Haman walks by Mordecai. Mordecai doesn't bow to him. That angers Mordecai. That once. Next time it happens, he goes and tells the king, and he says, you got to take care of all the Jews. Get rid of them all. They're the worst. They're so disrespectful. Watch what they do to you. And Mordecai, and the king, being the drunk king as he is, he said, all right, whatever. Not knowing that the queen is Jewish. So he says, okay, I'm going to set a law, a decree, that will kind of remove everything. Remove all the Jews. When that happened, Mordecai panicked, told the queen, said, got to do something. And there's a back and forth there. We're not going to get into the details of the back and forth, but now the queen responded by throwing 2 feasts. So this is the second feast. Okay, so I just wanted to give you guys a recap. Now, we're at the second feast now. Why? We talked about this. So those who are here, why did she throw a feast to begin with? Why? We talked a little bit about this last week.
Because she knew that they liked parties.
Okay.
And she wanted to show them that she was giving and not just asking.
Exactly. There's a service aspect of it. There's a service. All the other parties were thrown by the king for himself. Remember, we said he was showing off his riches. This party was for the king, given by Esther. It's a way of service. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't think of it so much in that kindness. I thought it was more, she's very strategic. Like, she's playing the game to get the thing that she's about to ask for. And honestly, they're probably all drunk by the time she asks for the request.
But the question is, she's through 2 feasts. So the first time they threw the party, last chapter, and it was just him and Haman and her. And he asked her, he's like, whatever you want, thank you for this party, whatever you want, up to half the kingdom I'll give you. And she's like, no, the only thing I want is for you to come to tomorrow's party.
This is her opportunity to disclose Haman's.
She had the opportunity the first time.
Yeah, she did.
Actually, this is the third time.
No, the second party.
First time when
When she met him the first time. Yes. Yes.
He told her
Exactly.
So half the kingdom I will give you.
Yeah.
And second time, first party. And this
Exactly.
time.
But this is the second party.
We discussed it
Yeah.
before. She had a plan, or she don't.
Exactly.
We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
But here's the previous chapter. God works at night because He changed the scenario. Because if He wait until night, Mordechai will be hanging on the morning. That's why King couldn't sleep. Scenario changed upside
Exactly.
down. And then this is the last party for the last banquet for the king and Esther, and I think she will talk now.
Yeah.
But till now, I couldn't understand why she didn't.
We don't know. Yeah, we don't know why she waited.
Yeah.
Because everything could have been done. Okay, the first day. Okay, now maybe she said maybe it was an uncomfortable situation because remember it was dangerous for her to just walk up to the king.
Yeah.
So maybe she felt like, okay, let me feed them first and get them a little bit tipsy. Maybe that was her thing. But then after, at the party, she still didn't ask. What we take from that, we talked about it last week about her, did she have a plan or was she stalling or what? And we see God working in, behind the scenes again. With this whole Haman thing and the king saying okay and Mordecai getting robed and celebrated. So there was some movements. But more than that, think about what we ask for in life. Think about all the things we want. Sometimes we sit and pray and we have a list. And we do this all the time, and even when we say we don't want to do it, it happens. We come up with a whole list of things that we want. It's like, like Chris, you'll see now coming up all the ads, the commercials for Christmas and wish lists and stuff like that. The Black Friday deals and all this stuff, and adding to the cart online. It's going to be, and that's what this is. Sometimes we feel like I want something and I need it now. Like, why not? Is Esther asking for something bad? Is it something selfish? No. It's completely about her people. Yeah.
I missed some meetings or something.
Yeah.
But there was 3 days of fasting.
Yeah.
So I'm just guessing.
Mm-hmm.
Was it she wanted to finish the 3 days of fasting before she asked, or that was a long time ago?
Finished already.
The 3 days. The 3 days of fast was between the time when Mordecai told her about the situation and the time she went to talk to the king. And we talked about how the fasting and the prayer was a time to really just connect with God before she takes that step. But here I'm thinking, I want you to think about the stuff that we want so bad, and how God sometimes tells us, not right now. But we react, this is the best time. This is the best time for this. Why can't I have this car right now? Why can't I have this situation right now? Because that's not the best time. It's all in God's timing. It's all in God's timing. And this book is all about God's timing. And it's just funny when you look at it from the outside and see all the little pieces. Yeah.
So what Maggie was saying is that it seems that she's strategic, and I agree that it can look that way, but when you share with us about how she was showing him love, and that's really the heart of the Father, like when he asks us to wait, and we are supposed to honor him and worship him and love him and give God what he wants, regardless of whether or not he answers our requests. So I think that just when you were saying that, it was like a mirror reflection of how we're supposed to approach God.
And honestly, like, there's 2 ways, there's multiple ways she could have approached. But why throw? She knows that this guy, like, think of Esther's reasoning. She knows that this man has the power and already has declared death to all the Jews. But she's still going and serving. She might be doing it in a strategic way, but regardless of the strategy, it's all done with love. Any action from a godly person has to be done in love. Regardless of what the action is. If it's done in love and sincerity, that's it. She threw them the party, and then she threw them another party. And we'll see here what happens at this party. Negi, do you add something?
She didn't tell the king what he's supposed to do.
Yeah.
She asked only for...
Exactly. We'll see here. Yeah. Well, the first time she said, I would love for you to come to my other party. Tomorrow is a party. And she's like, okay. I mean, the king said okay, and Haman said okay. Yeah.
I just can't, I'm putting myself into Esther's shoes. I can't imagine loving someone who's about to kill every single last bit of people, all of my people. So how can she have, I can see myself remaining calm in the situation and trying to mitigate the effects, but I can't see myself doing something in love.
That is.
Like, why she didn't poison him first?
Well, I know, because then everything would have been whatever. But she would have been in charge. She's the queen, right? Here's that. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say maybe the first banquet was for her to meet Haman. Has she met Haman before?
Oh, that's a good point. I don't know. I mean, maybe. Yeah. I mean, she wasn't really visible for a while. She was so we don't know. Yeah.
But still, Haman is known from the beginning.
I mean, that's a good point. He could have been there in the beginning, the first parties and stuff like that. Going back to Marianne's point, that the idea of loving in a bad situation,
loving a bad person,
this is what differentiates Christianity from anything else. I think, to me personally, that's the hardest thing to do in Christianity. Because when Christ said a lot of things when he was on earth in the Bible. And he said, love your neighbors. And he said, do good things. And he showed us how to do good things. And he went and he said, but when he said, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, that makes no sense. That, to me, is where everything else, like Jews loved Jews. Like, back then, that wasn't a weird comment. That wasn't a weird thing to say. But here, love your enemies. How could we love somebody who kills? How could we love somebody who hates? But that, like, Christ was the perfect example. He didn't just say, love your enemies, but we see people who spat at him, who beat him, who killed him. Who killed him. And what did he say on the cross? Forgive them, for they know not what they do. He gave excuses. So you're right to be not able to make sense of it. It doesn't. Godly love, Christian love, makes no sense in this world. That's why you look at, people used to make fun of Mother Teresa. People used to tell her, like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What difference will you make by taking care of that one little child in India? And she said, it's a drop in the bucket. It's a drop in the bucket. I'm just doing one part. So what we have to do is, yes, it's good that love makes no sense. That Esther doing something kind makes no sense in this. That's good. Because we realize when we look around, love doesn't make sense here in society. We can see that. Just turn on the news for 5 minutes. You could see that there's no such thing. Like, you'll never see a nice story in the news. Because love doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. So, yeah.
Well, I think, about my own question, there's a secret about Esther. She's not normal person. Here in chapter 2, in verse 15, when the king was supposed to make this contest to choose the queen, she take nothing with her into the king. The enemy of this side was Haggai. He allowed all the girls to take whatever they want. She took nothing. Yeah. And that shows how she is.
Yeah.
She's different. She's totally different.
She's different, and we see that in what she said also when, after the back and forth with Mordecai, she said, okay, if I perish, I perish. If I die, I die. I'm going to do what's right in the eyes of God. I have a position. We talked about that before. Being in a position to do something. God will bless it. He does. When we're in a position, God has put them there. God obviously put Esther there. He could have picked any woman in the world. He picked a Jewish woman, a godly woman, and so God is the one, the director. He's the one who put her there. So He obviously had a reason for her to be there. Now we just have to figure out what she did to do that. So, verse 3 that Julie just read, it is basically the situation. He said it again in verse 2. He said, okay, I see you're throwing me all these parties and stuff. What do you want? Tell me what you want. And he said the same thing he said before, up to half the kingdom. Look at how he thinks and look at how Esther thinks. He is looking at it in possessions. He's looking at it in possessions. And we see that a lot in the world, in society. How do we get, sometimes what we want is not possessions, but we want certain virtues. And the world is telling us, no, work on your possessions. Figure out how to get the most money. Forget how generous you can be, how loving you can be, how faithful you can be, how whatever. The list goes on. Don't worry about that stuff. Focus on your possessions and look at all the things. I'll give you whatever you want. And that's what the king is saying here. And she said, if I found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given at my petition, and my people at my request. She started very direct. Save my life. I can imagine at this point, the king is thinking like, what's going on? Remember, the king doesn't know she's a Jew. So he didn't know that he has a decree against her. So he's telling her this, and he's saying, I mean, she's saying this now, and this is how she continues. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. Okay. What do you mean we have been sold? Why is she telling the king we've been sold? Was there actually a selling? The decree, what did the decree say?
No, because Haman offered money. If you go back to
Exactly.
Haman offered money.
Exactly. So this wasn't a free deal. Haman paid for this decree to be made. That's how much he wanted this to happen. This idea of being sold is a biblical idea as well. We say this in the liturgy. We are sold on account of our sins. We're in bondage. We're in bondage, in sin. Sin is bondage. Sin is prison. Sin is slavery. And she compares this slavery and says, if I was in a different type of slavery, I would take it. I wouldn't even open my mouth. But this type of slavery to death, and death meaning sin in our life, we're going to die with no end in sight. So she's saying this, she's like, I wouldn't normally complain, but I'm complaining now because we're sold to this thing, this death that doesn't make any sense. So if somebody can read the rest from 5 to 10, we'll see how the king responds. God.
Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared.
Verse 5. Yeah, 5 to 10.
Oh, sorry. So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, who is he and where is he? Who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is the wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the palace of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, will he also assault the queen while I am in the house? As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows, fit to keep its high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided.
Okay. It's such an interesting part of the story here. How did the king react to what Esther said? Compassionately. More than that. He was angry. Who is he and where is he? And who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? He didn't get what he did. Ever since we started this book, the king's been drunk. Just very little of time he's been sober. And we've seen how this evil, yeah, it's impairing his judgment, and the people are taking advantage of that. The people who are close to him.
And here he's drunk also.
Yeah, he's always drunk. He's always drunk. The first thing it says, as he got up from his, verse 7, then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine. So he's not, we haven't seen him sober yet. But we see what happened. We see that the king here is asking, something's going on, I'm going to fix this. Esther said, the adversary and enemy is the wicked Haman. Look at the word she used. The adversary and the enemy is the wicked Haman. What other times do we see these words being used in the Bible? Who else do we describe in these words? Satan. The idea, Haman symbolized evil in the story. And the way Esther presented this, she said, this is the problem right here. He's the problem. Did she tell him what to do? Did she tell the king what to do? No. That's not our role. That's not our role. When we find something wrong, we just tell God the problem. We see this a lot. We see this a lot in the Bible. And that's how prayer is. Prayer is not about telling God the problem and the solution. Sometimes we kind of mention the problem, but then we give him a whole 5-point plan. We say, well, you're going to do this, and then this, and then this is the timing, God. You got, what's today? The 4th. You got till the 6th. By the end of the weekend, you got to take care of this problem. And God is saying, no, that's not how you should do things. We see a lot, even though the God is not mentioned once in this, and prayer is not mentioned once in here in this book. We see prayer. We see prayer and God being acted upon here. We see that this is what true prayer is. We see that going back or going forward from this book in the New Testament. Fast forward to the wedding of Cana of Galilee.
So you don't have wine.
St. Mary said, they don't have wine. Did she say, do something? Did she say how to do it? Did she give him ideas? You say, okay, they don't have wine. you could either go buy wine from the store, or you could, I guess, whatever, turn water into wine. Like, she didn't give him a plan. She didn't give him suggestions. All she said was, here's the issue. Same in this situation. Esther is saying to the king, this man is the issue. Haman is the issue. He wants us to die. Now, when we tell God our problem, are we willing to accept any solution? That's one of the hardest things. Because now you already told them the problem. You've done your part. That's where faith comes into play big time. Because now you're saying, God, here's the issue, here's the situation, here's my problem. And then I step back. That step back is so hard. Because now you have to say, okay, God, my hands are tied. Like, that's it. I've done my part. Yeah.
But both examples you gave right now, there was no waiting period.
There was no waiting period.
So our problem is waiting period. Or my problems.
No, I mean, it's my problem too. You're right. You're right. The waiting period.
It's like, did you hear me? Should I say it again?
That's a very good point. But our waiting period, like the time, is God's outside of time. So sometimes God's solution is at a different time than what we think. But what we have to do is do it the right way. Like, we have to do our part and then trust that God's going to do His part. Is that easy? No, it's not easy. But you're absolutely right, Ram, is like the idea of waiting is hard. But God shows us that He does things not in our time, but in His perfect time. In His perfect time. At the wedding of King of Galilee, if Christ changed the water into wine a week later, would that have made any sense to anybody? No. But at that time, it was the perfect time. Same here. Same here. Esther has just presented to the king this situation. We're at chapter 7. Esther presented the situation to the king. Now, we see how the king reacts right now. He says, we see when she mentioned the adversary and enemy is the wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Yeah.
Abuna, she's very wise. She didn't mention Haman in the beginning.
At all.
Because she knows the relationship between the king and him.
She initiated.
His case,
exactly.
Through her way, she begged for her life and for her people. Then king started asking.
Was her goal to get rid of Haman?
No.
That's not, like, we have to look at what our intentions are when we present to God. What our, sometimes, huh?
I said motives.
Exactly. What are our motives? What are our, like, sometimes we go to God and we say, okay, God, well, you know what? This is what I want, but in order to do this, I think you got to take care of this person and then do this and do this and fix that person too. And you give them, change everybody else. She's not saying about changing the people involved. She wants God, or she wants the king in this situation, but we want God to change situations. Here, she wants the king to change the situation. And like Nagy said, it had nothing to do with Haman. The king asked, who is this guy? Tell me who, I'll take care of him. Who is this guy? And she said, the adversary and the enemy is Haman. Words that we only use to describe the devil. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry. I need to vent about something. I was kind kind of disappointed about something. I think she's already, I feel like she's such an impressive character already with a lot of what she does. I was slightly disappointed that what is not mentioned, so I don't know if they happened or not, but I was kind of disappointed. I wanted her to be the one that's like, no, don't kill him, let God deal with it. But I don't know if she advocates for him not being hung.
Well, we'll see here. So what was the response? So the king arose in his wrath. He's angry. He's upset. He's drunk. And went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. He's pleading.
No, but we don't know if she says okay, king,
We don't know, but was her goal. It's like, for example, you call something out in a bad situation. And that, you call something out in a school environment, for example, and that teacher gets fired. Was your intention to get the teacher fired? No. Your intention was to fix the situation. You're presenting the problem, and you're presenting the problem to the principal, for example, and you're saying, principal, something bad is happening in the school, fix it. Here's the situation. The principal took out the teacher. Yeah. No.
It's verse 8. Maybe I don't understand it, but was he trying to hurt the queen and the king walked in? Maybe that's why.
Well, when the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, "Will he also assault the queen while I'm in the house?" We don't know exactly what's...
I'm gonna kill you, kind of.
Because it doesn't say...
He was drunk too.
Everybody is drunk in this.
I'm trying to answer the question why she didn't believe her, because he was trying to kill her at that moment.
What he saw it as a possible assault.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't know. We don't know the intentions. All we know, remember, I said in the beginning, we need to look at the characteristics of these people. What did we know about Mordecai? From the beginning? Day 1. Think chapter 1. Godly man. All we knew about Mordecai. We didn't know his background. We didn't know anything. We just knew he's a godly man. He was a Jewish man, but he was a godly man. All we knew about Queen Esther. What did the king know about Queen Esther, and what did we know about Queen Esther? What did the king know?
She's beautiful.
She's beautiful. She won the beauty contest. She became the queen. That's it. What did we know about her? She's a faithful Jewish woman. And that's why God put her in that situation. Remember, we said this is like a movie, like a series. And the director's in the background, moving things around. So, in this situation, Haman, what do we know about him? Evil, proud. Huh?
Son of Agagite.
I can't hear you.
Son of Agagite.
Yeah, oh yeah. He's
those people like Guinness.
The Jews from back in the day. Yeah, that's yes, that was his background. But what kind of person was he? Bad person. Yeah.
I was thinking, and this is my thought, that when she said in verse 6, the adversary, the enemy, is that wicked Haman. So by her saying that, wouldn't that say kill him? Basically, he's the enemy. He's in the enemy's camp. I mean, he's in our camp. So if the enemy is in your camp, you want to get rid of him, right? So
but who's in control?
God is in control.
Well, in this story, who's in control?
The king is in control.
Yeah, the king's in control. So Esther didn't tell the king, kill him. He could have just changed the decree. He could have just punished him. He could have downgraded him. She didn't say kill him. The funny thing is, how did he decide to kill him?
The same way he decided to kill Mordecai.
What? His own, whatever, his plan. His own plan. And the eunuchs are the ones who brought it up. They're like, well, actually, Like, he came up with a plan already, and I think it's a great idea. The gallows, right? To hang him. So this idea, when we pray to God, when we ask God, we don't tell God the solutions or the options. Sometimes I'm not going to give God the solution, but I'll give him a multiple choice. I'll say this. But it's not. Sometimes God usually picks E, none of the above, and does something else. And that's what happens. In this story, the same thing. Same thing. We have to trust. We have to trust that God is in control. And in this situation, it says, as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So once he saw a possible assault, we don't know. It might have looked like it. All we know, he was pleading for his life. And they covered his face. And now Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. We notice something here about this king. Has he ever made a decision for himself?
The first one.
Every single decision he made was because of the people around him. If the people are bad around him, it was a bad decision. If people were good, it was a good decision. He never stood up and said anything.
Actually, this is the first good decision. There is no good decision he did.
I'm saying even this wasn't even his idea. Nothing was his idea. So what we have to know is also who we surround ourselves with makes a big difference. It really does. We're influenced. This influence, we see this, even the most powerful person in the world at this time, King Ahasuerus is the most powerful person. Why were all these decisions being made? It was because of the people around him. It's like, it works in every aspect. If you're surrounded by a bunch of people who sing really well, you're going to sound great. You just blend in. If you're surrounded by a bunch of people who can play ball, your team's going to win. Like, it's the same thing with godly people. You surround yourself with godly people, good things are going to happen. I think friendship and who you surround yourself with is a very important factor in Christian life. And we see it here. And we see it's all these eunuchs. In the first couple of chapters we hear about the advisors. Same thing. Who are you getting advice from? Who are you surrounding yourself from? Yeah.
I also want to say, besides the community piece, like, it also makes a huge difference if you yourself are grounded in Christ. You know, like, if you have a personality that will give humility to whoever you're with, you're always going to be tossed.
That's a good point.
You yourself have to be somebody who's as solid as possible and has a good community.
That's a great point. You need to be a solid person as well. In this case, the king took the idea of the eunuch, which was the gallows that were built in order by Haman's people. For what purpose? To kill Mordecai. And he's like, okay, hang him on it. In the end of verse 9, he says, then the king said, hang him on it. Yeah, sure, whatever. That's fine. That's how God uses something negative and turns it into something positive. God uses bad decisions we make. As long as we are on track with God, as long as we're connected with God, God will reroute, like the GPS. If you don't have an address in your GPS, the GPS is not going to reroute you. It's not going to say anything. But if you have an address and you make the wrong turn, it's saying go right, and you make a left, it's going to just make you go. It's going to say, okay, rerouting, and then next thing you know, it's going to upload, and then you're going to make another left, and you're going to go back, and you're going to go the right way. That's what this story is about. All these pieces, but God wants, He sees faithful people like as strong and as worldly powerful as this king is. Who's one of the most powerful people in this story, physically? No. Even more than Esther. Well, Esther's one of them. Mordecai. We see Esther and Mordecai, they're in control. God's allowing them, like God is putting them in places to make, like, just by her saying this, like it didn't happen yet, but Haman is gone. Is the problem solved yet?
No, not quite.
Why?
Because of the decree.
Exactly. But why didn't the king just do the decree right away? Like, did Haman have to die? Could he have just done the decree and changed?
He's the source of evil.
No, he can't.
That's it right there. God doesn't only want us to like, in order to get on the right track, sometimes we have to remove something from our life.
God said vengeance are His.
Exactly. He's going to take care of it. He's going to take care of it. Remember, Queen Esther didn't say, you got to kill Haman. He just said the problem. When we present God the problem, God's going to take care of it. In this case, sometimes we think that we can get back on the right track. We can work on our relationship with God when there's something, certain sins or certain people in our life or certain things that we do or certain situations that we're in that we can't get out of. We're still stuck with that person or that sin. No, God's saying, I got to cut that off first. You can't move forward if this is like, this is stopping you. This is stopping you. It's like this anchor that's holding you down. That's why, if you're serious about your relationship with God, there's going to be major changes. And in this situation, he's saying he could have just made the decree and demoted Haman and called it a day. We could have been done in chapter 7. But no, the series has to go on. But he said, first, cut this evil out. Cut this part out of your life. Let's cut him out. Then we could start thinking about a solution. So sometimes when we present God the problem and we're waiting, God's waiting too. God could be waiting as well. God could be waiting for us to make that step, for us to take that right step, for Him to be like, okay, this is the positive answer. But it's not just only us waiting on God. It's sometimes God, just like on the cross, hands out wide, waiting for us to return back to Him. For us to decide, okay, lifestyle-wise, this is not how I want to live. I want to get back with you. I want to live with you. Once I say I want to live with you, how do I do it? And we'll get into that in the next chapter. Any questions so far? I had a question. So if nobody has a question, I have a question. How did this all occur? Why was this decree made? Mordecai didn't bow?
Unresolved conflict. People.
Okay. Between who?
Haman's people and Mordecai.
No, Mordecai and Haman specifically. It was those two. Mordecai didn't bow down to Haman.
But Haman didn't like the Jews.
Huh?
Haman did not like the Jews.
From his, even from back in the day, the background, his people.
Yes.
He had a grudge, but he also didn't like Mordecai. Now, we said, at that moment, we said, how could God do that? Was Mordecai doing something right or wrong? At the time, what did we think?
He was doing something wrong.
Wait, Mordecai?
Well, but he wasn't bowing down to a man. He was.
So he wasn't doing anything wrong?
No.
So in the eyes of God, he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was holding his ground. He's a faithful person, and I'm not going to bow to you. Like, who are you?
Yeah.
And remember, Haman symbolizes the devil here. So he didn't let go of his morals and his virtues and his lifestyle to bow down to Haman. And then we hear about this decree. And I know when reading this for the first time, I remember thinking, like, come on, God. Come on. He did something good. He did something good. How could you let this decree happen because of something good?
That reminds me about one of my friends. He used to tell me whenever he reads the Bible, he faced troubles in his life. Yeah. He used to say so. And that's why we need to read more.
I think that's a big it's a big thing. The closer we get to God,
The worst problem.
we get. You know why? No, I mean, I don't know why, but what I think is why is because we reach a point. It's like, okay, like we have to depend on God. Real connection to God is faith in God. Our faith, like Christianity, is not about following a set of rules. If it was following a set of rules, we wouldn't be facing any issues. Mordecai didn't bow down to him because it was a rule. It was because the idea of bowing down to something evil, or someone evil, or someone who represents evil, it's not who Mordecai is. It's not what he's about. So here in this situation, Mordecai he did the right thing, and we can look at this as God punished all the people. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say something that might sound funny because we're human and He's God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason why me personally, is having a problem, because I'm only seeing one point on the spectrum.
Exactly.
And I don't see the end. And I'm anxious to know what the end is. And I'm not rested till I know the end.
Exactly.
And I'm always doing this day in, day out.
Absolutely.
And then the end is good, but then I'm facing another point in time, and I don't know the end, and I'm living in this cycle.
I think that is, you hit it on the spot, because that idea of us not knowing why is our biggest problem. Like, for us to think, like, did God have a plan? Of course He did. We didn't have a plan. And we couldn't even see the plan. Remember, we said this book is very different than other books. Father David just finished Corinthians before this, and it was St. Paul saying this, and then we sit and we contemplate on that verse. And then St. Paul said this, and why did he say this, and what does that relate to us? This is a story, and we're sitting here like, what's going to happen next? Why did he do that? And there's some very ironic parts in the story. Now that we see Haman dying, the king killing Haman, we see in the last chapter and this chapter, God does not forget. All of a sudden, the king couldn't sleep because he didn't reward Mordecai. And we said, look at how God doesn't forget the good. We see here that God didn't forget the bad. Haman could have been left off. But God doesn't just... there's consequences when we do something wrong. And that's a Christian mindset. Some people think that, oh no, as long as I, confess or repent, that I don't face consequences. No, you face consequences, but now you're on track with God. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Can I just say another thing?
Yeah.
If I knew, if I was the person and I read all the chapters and I know the end result, I knew that God was going to take care of me and everything, I don't think I would have fasted. I don't think I would have done a lot of things that
That's
He
a
went
great
through.
point.
So I think that's why God does this to me, because He wants me to go through certain exercises to shape me.
Okay.
Otherwise, He'll take care of it and everything is good. And
That's a great way to do
we'll
it.
just go through it. But I know it's for my good. But again, that's. I know the answers again, but it's hard to live it.
Yeah.
It's hard to make. It's hard not to doubt it. How about that?
It's perfectly said, and I think that idea is what Christianity is about. Going from going from a person who knows about God to a person who knows God. That's what it's about. Having the faith and doing the faithful acts of worship, acts of prayer, acts of love. All of these acts, because we believe, God will do something. St. Paul says, faith is the evidence of things unseen. Makes no sense. Faith is the evidence of things unseen. What do you mean, evidence of things unseen? But that's what faith is. Faith is what we see this and we say, when Mordecai didn't bow and we saw the decree, we're like, oh no, how could God do this? And remember, we said it's like a cliffhanger. It's like episode 4 or something, and we have to wait till next week to find out what happens. But that's what this book is. It's a series, and it won't make sense till we see the whole thing. That's what the Bible is there for. If you only see certain aspects of the Bible, that's not what it's about. It's about the whole picture. Any comments or questions? Additions? So we're almost